been around Olympic National Park for a long time. I've hiked nearly every major trail, from the dripping green of the Hoh rainforest to the salt-sprayed rim of Rialto Beach, up the snowy slopes toward Hurricane Ridge, and back again. Back in the late 2000s, I started as a park volunteer, and eventually became a ranger. So yeah, I know these forests and mountains like the back of my hand. Or at least I thought I did. When you've spent as many soggy nights under the Sitka spruces and moss-draped maples as I have, you start to feel like nothing out there can surprise you. But I remember one evening in 2010 that genuinely surprised me. I was out in the Hoh rainforest solo, checking a section of the Hoh River Trail near a spot called 5 Mile Island. The day's visitors had long gone, and dusk was settling in. It was spring, which in the Hoh still means a constant chill and damp. It had rained earlier. No shock, given the Hoh gets about 140 inches of rain a year, and everything was dripping quiet. Now, the Hoh is known for its quiet. There's even a spot out there called 1 Square Inch of Silence, supposedly the quietest place in the U.S. As I walked, I noticed the usual forest sounds fading away. No birds, no insects, just the patter of residual raindrops. It felt like the moss was soaking up all sound, leaving an eerie hush. I stopped, thinking maybe a cougar was around. The animals go silent when a predator's on the prowl. I rested my hand on my radio just in case. That's when I heard a sharp crack of a branch about 50 feet off the trail. I've heard elk break branches and bears too, but this sounded deliberate, almost like someone snapped it. "Hello?" I called out, half expecting a stray hiker or fellow ranger. No answer. I played my flashlight over the trees. Everything was shadows and thick ferns. Then came a whiff of something odd, a musky wet dog smell mixed with a hint of ozone, like the air before a lightning strike. My skin prickled. I caught a glimpse of movement between 2 big leaf maples draped in moss. A tall figure, upright, broad, just for a second, maybe 30 yards away, partially obscured by the boles of the trees. My heart jumped. It looked huge, certainly bigger than any person I knew. Well over 6 feet, maybe closer to 8. In the dimness, I could not make out details, just a dark, bulky shape. And then, as soon as I focused, it was gone. It didn't dash away or anything. It was just not there anymore, as if the forest had swallowed it up. I stood there in the drizzle, heart hammering. A million thoughts were racing. I wanted to rationalize it as a bear standing upright, or a trick of light. I even wondered if my eyes were playing tricks in the twilight. But bears in this rainforest are usually black, and what I saw was taller and moving in a distinct bipedal way. Cautiously, I stepped off the trail toward where the figure had been. The ground was a sponge of moss and mud. My boots squelched with each step. Under a big maple, I found disturbed moss and a patch of soft earth, and in it, an imprint. I knelt down. It was a footprint, or at least it looked like one, about 18 inches long, wider than any human foot, with what could be 5 toe marks. I stared in disbelief. No way a human made that barefoot out here, and a bear's print, with the claw marks, would look different. My mind did gymnastics. Could it be some prank with a fake Bigfoot stompers? But who would be out here in the rain, at dusk, miles from the trailhead, pulling a hoax on a random ranger like me? I didn't have casting plaster with me. Wasn't exactly planning on playing cryptozoologist that day. And the light was fading fast. I did what I could, snapped a couple of photos with the small digital camera I carried, and noted the print's dimensions with a pocket tape. The longer I crouched there, the more I felt an uncanny quiet around me. I realized even the sound of the Hoh River in the distance seemed muffled. Eventually, I stood up and took a few calming breaths. Common sense kicked in. I wasn't keen on sticking around in the dark forest with an unknown giant creature potentially nearby. I carefully made my way back to the trail, and then hustled the remaining mile or so to the Hoh Ranger Station. By the time I got there, it was full dark and my rain jacket was soaked. Another ranger, Dave, was just finishing his duties. He took one look at me and joked, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a chuckle and muttered something about almost running into a bear. I wasn't ready to say more. Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. I went home that night to my little cabin on the outskirts of Forks, the nearest town, famous for its endless rain, and, thanks to some vampire novels, teenage goth tourists. Lying in bed, listening to the rain on the roof, I kept replaying what I saw, or thought I saw. By logical standards, I hadn't really seen much. A shadowy shape, a big footprint. It could have been nothing. Or it could have been Bigfoot. Here in the Pacific Northwest, Bigfoot is like our local ghost story. Everyone has a friend of a friend with a tale, and Washington State has more sightings on record than anywhere else. I always treated it as folklore. But that night, staring at my ceiling, I found myself seriously contemplating that the old legend might be prowling our mossy valleys. After that incident, I couldn't let it go. I started listening more intently to the chatter among locals and fellow rangers. In a small community like Forks, gossip travels fast, whether it's about someone's prized pumpkin or something weird seen in the woods. One morning at the diner in Forks, I overheard an old-timer talking to a couple of tourists. I was at the next table, pretending to mind my own business over pancakes, while he regaled them with local lore. He talked about loggers in the old days seeing giant ape men, and strange lights moving over the trees at night. The tourists ate it up. I half smiled into my coffee. I'd heard it all before and usually dismissed it. But now, given my recent encounter, I found myself hanging on every word. The old guy said something like, "Out here on the Olympic Peninsula, we get all the weird stuff. Bigfoot, UFOs, you name it." UFOs and Bigfoot, I remember thinking. That seemed like a stretch. Little did I know. I started casually asking around, real casual, like, "Heard any good Bigfoot stories lately?" Mostly said with a chuckle. Most folks just shared the standard jokes or the classic tales that circulate in tourist brochures. But one of our park's search and rescue, SAR team members, a quiet guy named Bill, got a little more serious. He told me, off the record, about a disappearance that still haunted him. According to Bill, a few years back, 2006, an ex-Army paratrooper named Gilman vanished near the staircase area of the park. I vaguely remembered that case from the news. A fit, experienced hiker just gone without a trace. Bill had been part of the search. 10 days we looked, he said, stirring his coffee, and not a bootlace found. It's like he up and evaporated. I asked what he thought happened. Bill shrugged and said, "Honestly, it's like he walked into another dimension or something," half joking. That stuck with me. Another dimension. It gave me a little chill, considering what I'd seen in the Ho. I filed it in the back of my mind. Another park biologist once told me his listening equipment picked up a low whistle and knock pattern in the deep Cano Valley that he couldn't explain. He was baffled by it, and honestly, it made the hairs on my neck stand up to hear him describe it. By late 2011, I quietly asked Maria, one of the veteran rangers, if she'd ever encountered something odd in the park. It was an October evening with rain pounding on the visitor center roof, when I cautiously asked if she'd ever seen something she couldn't explain. She gave me a long, searching look before answering. She confided, off the record, that over the years a few rangers and maintenance folks had reported weird sightings or signs. "We don't talk about it officially," she told me. According to Maria, people had occasionally seen a tall, hairy figure peering at them from deep in the woods. Others heard unexplained noises, whoops, whistles, wood-on-wood knocking sounds in remote valleys. Once, a trail crew found a deer carcass way up a tree, as if something had lifted it there. And no, black bears here don't do that. This was all said in hushed tones in the empty ranger station after hours. I remember the rain was pouring outside, drumming on the roof, as if to punctuate the mystery. Maria eventually sighed and offered a wry smile. "There's a lot we don't understand out there," she said. "Just be careful, and maybe don't go looking for trouble." She said it lightly, but the implication was clear. Of course, telling me not to go looking only made me want to look more. I didn't go full-on monster hunter or anything, but my curiosity was burning. I started carrying a small point-and-shoot camera on all my patrols. Later, I saved up for a motion-activated trail camera and started hiding it in likely spots. near game trails, off-trail clearings, anywhere I'd seen tracks or felt something odd. Most of the time, I captured nothing but elk, deer, and once a curious raccoon that gave the lens a good licking. The mystery ape man remained elusive. Once, in mid-2012, I retrieved one of my trail cams from a spot way off the Hoh River Trail near Mount Tom Creek. I found the camera housing scratched up and the lens cracked, as if something had taken a swipe at it. It had managed to snap a few photos before it got whacked. Most were just ferns blowing in the breeze, but one image made my breath catch. It was blurry, but it showed a dark shape at the edge of the frame, and what looked like a large hand reaching toward the camera. The fingers appeared long, thick, and covered in hair. When I showed the photo to a colleague, without saying where it came from, he joked nervously, "Looks like Bigfoot wanted a selfie." We laughed it off, but I could tell both of us were unnerved. It wasn't definitive evidence, but it gave me goosebumps. Even a blurry hint like that was equal parts thrilling and unsettling. It proved we might be onto something, yet it deepened the mystery. Around that time, the park had some odd visitor reports too. In late summer 2012, campers at the Kalaloch campground on the coast reported strange lights over the ocean, just off La Push and Rialto Beach. People described orbs of blue light hovering above the treetops, then zipping out to sea. I wasn't there to see it, but I read the incident report later. The official explanation chalked it up to military flares, or maybe some atmospheric quirk. It was logged and pretty much forgotten, but it reminded me of that old guy's claim that UFOs and Bigfoot both haunt these woods, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was a connection or just coincidence. By fall of 2012, I decided to use some leave and do a little personal expedition in the park. Basically, I camped out in a few hot spots where I thought something might happen. I spent one night deep in the Hoh. Nothing much occurred beyond a bull elk crashing around, which nearly gave me a heart attack. I did another night near Sol Duke Hot Springs, where I heard a distant howling around 2 a.m. that didn't match coyotes or owls, a long, mournful wail that made the valley feel truly eerie. A couple in an RV at the campground heard it too. By morning, they were asking the camp host if we had wolves here. Officially, we don't, not since they were eradicated a century ago, though rumors persist. And finally, I spent a night up at Lake Crescent, which turned out to be the most eventful of the three. Lake Crescent is a deep, cold lake in the northern part of the park, ringed by steep mountains like Mount Storm King. It's stunning by day and haunting by night. Local lore says the lake was formed when a mountain spirit got angry at warring tribes and hurled a boulder, damming the valley, and cursed the waters in the process. For generations, people said Lake Crescent never gives up its dead. The water's so cold and lacking in oxygen that bodies don't readily float or decompose, which turned out to be true in at least one famous 1940 case of a body found perfectly preserved. In short, Lake Crescent has always had a heavy storybook aura to it. I camped on the north shore of the lake, away from other people, near where the Barnes Creek flows in. That night was cold but clear. The moon was out and the lake surface was still, a perfect mirror. I had a small fire going on the pebble beach. Across the water, the silhouettes of firs and cedars climbed the slopes of Storm King. Around midnight, I broke out the FLIR thermal imager I'd borrowed from a SAR buddy. I scanned the opposite shore slowly. The world through the thermal scope was monochrome and ghostly. Warm areas showed white, cold areas black. At first, I saw nothing but the expected blobs of heat, likely squirrels in trees, maybe a deer moving at the water's edge. Then, as I panned along an inlet across from me, I caught a bright patch I hadn't seen before. It was a moving heat signature, larger than a deer. I focused. The blob was maybe 200 yards away, hard to gauge in the darkness, but it seemed to be on the shore or just inside the tree line. It moved in a deliberate way. I adjusted the focus and could make out a tall shape. Then a second, smaller warm spot appeared right next to it. Two figures, one large, one smaller. My mind raced, a bear with a cub. But the large shape's outline was upright, not on all fours, and the smaller one was moving around it. The big one was radiating a lot of heat, suggesting it wasn't a bear with insulating fur, or if it was a very warm bear. I turned off the thermal and looked with my naked eyes across the moonlit lake. At that distance, I could only see dark shapes against the lighter backdrop of water. But I did see something, a tall silhouette on the opposite shore, and a smaller figure or object next to it. It looked like the big figure bent down and picked up the smaller one, almost like an adult picking up a child. My heart was pounding at this point. I decided to try something bold. I took my flashlight and clicked it on twice in that direction. 2 quick bursts. Perhaps not the wisest move, but I was hoping to provoke a reaction, or at least acknowledge whatever or whoever was over there. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, from across the silent lake, came a sound rolling over the water, a deep, resonant whoop. It was a call unlike any familiar animal, not the high-pitched scream of a cougar or the yip of coyotes. This was a chesty, primate-sounding whoop, descending in tone. It gave me instant goosebumps. I stood there by my dying fire, every hair on my neck standing up. I whooped back, a foolish adrenaline-fueled decision. I cupped my hands and imitated the sound as loud as I could across the water. The night went still again. Then a second whoop echoed back, longer and louder. I swear it almost sounded annoyed. I decided that was enough communication for one night. Come first light, I packed up and skirting around the lake to where I'd seen the shapes. It took a bit of bushwhacking to get to the exact spot. There was no established trail on that side. Sure enough, on a quiet cove's pebble beach, I found footprints in the gravel. Large, human-like footprints, and smaller ones too, like a child's bare feet. The large ones were about 17 inches long. I crouched and pressed my hand into one of the big prints. The impression was deep. Whatever made it was extremely heavy, far heavier than me. The smaller prints looked to be maybe 6 inches long. I found at least 4 distinct prints of the big ones, and a few of the little ones going between the water and the tree line. Scattered near the prints were some half-eaten fish, looked like trout, with guts scooped out. And oddly, I found 3 scorch marks in the pebbles, like little patches where the rocks had been singed or heated. They were still slightly warm to the touch in the morning cool. I couldn't fathom what that was about. There hadn't been any lightning or man-made fire there. The thought crossed my mind that it might be connected to whatever those creatures were, like an effect of some tool or something beyond my understanding. It was a bizarre detail that I noted in my journal. I left the area in a daze of excitement and confusion. On one hand, I felt I had evidence, footprints of 2 different sizes, and a possible sighting of 2 creatures together. On the other hand, I had more questions than ever. 2 of them? What were the scorch marks? Was I looking at a family of Sasquatch? If so, how in God's name were they staying hidden so well? I told one trusted friend, Joel, about what I found, omitting some of the stranger details. Joel was a biology instructor and a bit of a Bigfoot buff. He was one of the few people I knew who wouldn't laugh me out of the room. He got pretty enthused and helped me take plaster casts of the best print a couple days later. We even collected a few strands of coarse hair from a tree branch about 8 feet up, right above one of the prints. Brown, wiry hair, certainly not from a deer. Joel had a contact in a lab who agreed to do a DNA analysis on the hair. A couple of weeks later, Joel told me the preliminary result came back as basically human, but with oddities in the sequencing they couldn't quite place. Probably contaminated or degraded sample, the lab tech said. Still, it was intriguing to me. Almost like whatever this was, it was biologically very close to us. By this point, my mindset had shifted from, what did I see, to, these things are out there. How do I find out more? I was in deep, but I tried to keep it all low-key. I wasn't looking to become the part crackpot or draw any unwanted attention. Unwanted attention, however, found me. In early 2013, not long after my Lake Crescent experience, I was approached in town by a man who introduced himself as Dan. He was dressed like an out-of-town businessman, nice suit, polished shoes, which in laid-back Forks is as obvious as a neon sign. Dan claimed to be with a federal wildlife conservation unit and said he was doing a sweep through the national parks to check on various research projects. It sounded only half plausible. He asked about my patrol routes and if I'd observed anything unusual, like rare animal activity. The way he phrased things was odd. Finally, I shrugged and mentioned, "Well, some folks around here talk about Bigfoot. You must hear that a lot." I said it lightly, but his reaction was telling. He smiled thinly and said, "Yes, that does come up. What do you think about that?" It felt like an interview or an interrogation disguised as small talk. What really set off alarm bells was that Dan mentioned agencies that had no real reason to be involved in simple wildlife surveys. At one point he said, "We coordinate with various departments, Interior, Agriculture, even NOAA and DARPA if necessary." DARPA? The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency? The military's high-tech research arm? What did they have to do with wildlife? I remember actually asking him, half laughing, "Since when does DARPA care about elk populations?" He gave a bland chuckle and changed the subject. By the end of that chat, his message was clear. If I encountered anything truly unusual, I should report it through him. He handed me an unadorned business card with just a phone number. No agency name. After he left, I sat in my truck feeling a bit spooked. How did he know to talk to me? Had someone tipped off an inquiry up the chain? Or was he just casting a wide net, and I happened to fit a profile? I didn't mention my experiences directly, but I had the sense he already knew. It was an uncomfortable feeling, being on the radar of some unknown authority. That year, I also started noticing more overt government activity around the park. In 2014, with little fanfare, certain remote areas of Olympic were temporarily closed off for training exercises. One was near Mount Carey in the park's interior, not a typical spot for military drills. We occasionally get Navy or Coast Guard helicopters doing rescue training, but this was different. A colleague mentioned in hushed tones that he'd heard about unidentified aircraft being sighted, and that agencies like NOAA were even asked to monitor environmental data during one exercise. It sounded like wild rumors, yet given everything, I listened. Around the same time, folks in towns around the peninsula, Forks, Port Angeles, the native reservations, started complaining about increased jet noise. By 2015, it was public knowledge that the Navy was expanding its electronic warfare training in our region. They had these mobile radar transmitters they'd set up on logging roads in the national forests, and they were flying EA-18G Growler jets out of Whidbey Island to simulate combat scenarios overhead. The Navy insisted the exercises wouldn't significantly impact people or wildlife. Minimal noise, no dangerous radiation, etc. Still, locals weren't happy. I remember a community meeting where residents vented about the booming sounds and weird radio interference. Privately, a few of us in the park noticed odd side effects during some of those exercises. Our patrol radios would sputter with static bursts, and, on a few occasions, we heard what almost sounded like voices, faint, rapid, indecipherable, cutting through our channels. Officially, it was just likely bleed over from the Navy's electronic signals, or a glitch in our systems. Unofficially, I wondered if the same phenomena I'd encountered, like that humming sound in Seven Lakes Basin or the flash at Lake Crescent, were triggered or revealed by the heavy electromagnetic activity. It didn't help my nerves that I occasionally spotted unmarked white vans or government SUVs in odd places. Once, driving a back road near the park boundary, I passed a group of men setting up some kind of antenna by a clearing. They weren't Forest Service, wrong vehicles and attire. When I slowed down, they gave me a curt nod, no friendly wave, and my gut told me not to ask questions. It reminded me of something out of the X-Files. Meanwhile, more strange tragedies kept the tension up. In April 2017, a 22-year-old named Jacob Gray went missing after riding his bicycle into the park during a heavy rainstorm. We found his bike and gear by the Solduke River, but Jacob was nowhere to be found. I joined the search that spring-slogging through rain-soaked ferns and log jams, calling his name into the silence. Nothing. Not for days. Not for weeks. It was only 18 months later that his remains were discovered up a steep drainage far from the road. Likely a case of getting lost and succumbing to hypothermia. Tragic, but straightforward. Maybe. Yet I couldn't help noting the pattern. Healthy young man, sudden storm, then poof. People who vanish under bizarre circumstances, often near wild areas, often with bad weather hitting. Of course, Jacob's story probably has a sadly prosaic explanation, but given everything else I knew, it added to my unease. By now, I was personally convinced that something real and unusual was out there in the Olympics. I had seen it, or at least its silhouette. I had touched its footprints, heard its call. I even suspected there were multiple creatures, maybe a breeding population, as crazy as that sounds. And I also suspected that whatever they weren't just large primates minding their business. There was something almost uncanny about them, like the ability to avoid all detection save for a fleeting glimpse. How could a population of 7-foot-tall animals leave so little hard evidence? The cynic in me would say, because they don't exist. But I knew I'd encountered something. So did Maria and Bill and a few others. The pieces of the puzzle were lining up to form a picture that was equal parts fascinating and terrifying. A highly elusive, possibly intelligent being living in these forests. One that might even have capabilities we don't understand. The flashes, the interference, who knows? This put me in a strange headspace. By day, I still led nature walks and reassured campers that the scariest thing they might meet was a bear. By night or on solo patrols, I was hyper alert, half hoping and half fearing another encounter. I kept most of my logs and notes private. Officially, I wasn't reporting Bigfoot sightings in my ranger reports. I valued my job and sanity, but I was keeping my own little journal of every odd thing, every story or clue. My most intense encounter happened in the summer of 2018, and it still gives me goosebumps to think about. That year had been drier than usual. We had wildfires in the distance, and a lot of haze in the air by late July. The park was busy with visitors trying to escape the heat elsewhere. I had a friend, Kevin, who was a backcountry ranger like me. We often partnered on long patrols. I had confided in him over beers about some of the weird stuff, and while he was skeptical, he found it intriguing. We decided to do a late-night patrol together in a very remote area, partly for official duties, and partly because I think he wanted to see if there was anything to my stories. We headed into the Queets Valley, one of the most untamed corners of the park. No roads, few trails, just colossal trees and dense rainforest. We camped out near where the Queets River bends under Pelton Peak. The plan was to stay up through the night and see if anything unusual occurred, especially since there was going to be a full lunar eclipse, a blood moon that night, which meant extra darkness at totality. Around 11 p.m., the eclipse was making the moon dim and red. The forest was extremely dark. The usual chorus of distant owls and trickling water was present, and we sat quietly, listening. Sometime after midnight, we heard a splash in the river, like something or someone tossed a big rock into it. Then another splash. This wasn't a salmon jumping, different sound, and not a bear wading. They tend to make more continuous noise. It was like rocks being thrown. We killed our lantern and went into observation mode. Kevin had night vision goggles. I had the thermal imager again. Through the green tint of the night vision, we scanned the opposite side of the river. That's when Kevin grabbed my arm and whispered, "There." He directed my gaze to a gravel bar across the stream. I saw it too. A tall, upright figure, darker than the surrounding background, almost blending with the shadows, but just distinct enough in the moonlight. It was standing. Then it moved slowly and disappeared behind a clump of spruces. We waited, barely breathing. A minute later, further downstream, we caught another glimpse, or maybe a second figure, moving between trees. Suddenly, a rock about the size of a grapefruit came sailing through the air and thudded on the ground not 10 feet from us. We just about jumped out of our skins. Kevin instinctively pumped around into the chamber of his shotgun. We had brought it with us, loaded with rubber slug deterrents. He shouted, "We don't mean any harm," into the darkness. The only response was silence. I decided to try something I'd heard about: wood knocking. I found a good solid dead branch and whacked it hard against a tree trunk crack. The sound echoed across the river. For a moment, nothing. Then, from the trees on the far side, came a distinct knock-knock reply. 2 clear hits, like wood on wood. I looked at Kevin. His eyes were huge. It was the exact pattern I'd hoped to provoke, and we hadn't discussed doing that beforehand. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He nodded slowly. I knocked again. 1, 2, 3 in a row. This time the reply was a single whack, almost impatient. In the green glow of the night vision, I thought I saw movement. And then there they were. 2 figures stepping briefly into an open gravel patch on the far bank. One large, one smaller. I couldn't make out details, faces or anything. Just that they were bipedal. Human shape, but definitely not humans we knew. Way too big for one. They moved smoothly, not stumbling in the dark at all. The larger one seemed to be in front, with the smaller behind it. Kevin had the presence of mind to lift the thermal imager and confirm 2 hot targets. Then the larger figure stopped and turned in our direction. I swear I could feel its gaze, even though I couldn't truly see its eyes at that distance. An overwhelming feeling of being watched, measured, like how a deer must feel caught in headlights. Except these headlights were an unseen stare from across a river in the dead of night. What happened next is hard to articulate. The air felt like it suddenly charged with static. My ears popped as if pressure dropped. There was a faint buzz. My teeth literally buzzed. And then a brilliant flash of bluish light erupted from where the figures stood. It was like someone set off a giant camera flash. In that split second, I saw the outline of the tall creature illuminated clearly. Broad shoulders, a conical head, long arms by its side, and the smaller one next to it. Kevin yelped in surprise. Our night vision scopes went white from the overload, and we were blinded for a few seconds. A sharp crack sound followed. Later I wondered if it was a clap of thunderless thunder, if that makes sense, like air being ionized. I staggered backward, dizzy. It felt like the ground dropped from under me for an instant. When we recovered our wits, the darkness was back and the figures were gone. We immediately ran across the shallow part of the river toward the area, disregarding our own safety in the heat of the moment. But when we got there was nothing except a faint smell of ozone and burnt vegetation. Kevin swept his flashlight around, and we found a roughly circular patch of forest floor, maybe 10 feet across, where the plants were singed. Tiny flames smoldered on a fern, which we quickly stamped out. The rocks in the center of that patch were scorched black, and even cracking as if exposed to intense heat. Steam rose from the moss. We were both shell-shocked. "What the hell was that?" Kevin muttered, voice quivering. I had no answer. My hands were trembling uncontrollably, adrenaline and fear coursing through me. We spent the next few hours until dawn huddled by our camp, on edge, jumping at every little sound, which were mostly just normal forest noises. There were no further signs of our visitors. When daylight came, we inspected the scorched area again. It honestly looked like a miniature lightning strike zone, but the weather had been clear. The rational part of my brain was struggling. Had we witnessed some kind of technology? Or was it a natural ability of these beings? Neither made immediate sense. We hiked out later that morning, exhausted and deeply shaken. Back at the ranger station, we filed a very sanitized report. We described encountering unknown individuals who threw rocks and used some kind of stun grenade or incendiary device. It was technically true, from a certain point of view. We left out any mention of creatures or knocks or whoops. Even so, word traveled up the chain. We were debriefed by some higher-ups and a couple of gentlemen who arrived in a black unmarked helicopter. I kid you not. They weren't in uniform but flashed federal credentials. One claimed to be with the Department of Interior, the other with Army Intelligence. Something about coordinating wilderness training, a flimsy cover if you ask me. They grilled us on what we saw, especially the flash of light. We stuck to our story. Some presumably human intruders harassed us and fled. I did mention the bluish hue of the flash and the ozone smell, because those are facts even if unexplained. At those details, the two men exchanged a quick glance. They knew something, The debrief was brief, no pun intended, and somewhat tense. They thanked us and told us not to speak to the media, for the sake of park reputation and avoiding copycats. As if we were going to run off to the Forks Forum newspaper with a tale like this. Kevin was so shaken that he put in for a transfer to a different national park shortly thereafter. "I've had enough of Bigfoot and aliens," he joked weakly. I couldn't blame him. That night changed him. It certainly changed me. It's been a little while since all that happened. I actually left the park service in 2019. Officially, it was for a better paying job, but honestly, I needed to step away from the constant uncertainty and secret keeping. It's hard to do campfire programs by day and then wonder about monsters by night. I felt like I was living a double life, and it was wearing on me. I still have a big map of Olympic on my home office wall, dotted with pins and notes where I, and others, experienced odd things. Sometimes I catch myself staring at it, trying to piece it all together. I'm convinced now that there is at least one unknown creature out here, something very real, even if it's incredibly adept at staying unseen. And I suspect it's more than just an ape in the woods. The way it evaded us, the strange flashes and electromagnetic oddities. It wouldn't shock me if it has some traits or technology that we'd call science fiction. Maybe it can slip in and out of our reality somehow. After what I experienced, even the wildest theories seem on the table. Heck, the indigenous peoples of this region have legends of wild men in the forest, going back centuries. Sasquatch itself comes from a Salish word for wild men, so the idea isn't as far-fetched as it might sound. I also think there's been a deliberate effort to keep things quiet. The authorities never advertise these strange incidents. The Park Service doesn't exactly broadcast how many people go missing under odd circumstances, perhaps because the true numbers would terrify visitors. And every time something big happened, there were folks from some agency right there to clamp down on it. Even scientific agencies have been involved, like when NOAA was called in during an unexplained spate of gray whale deaths and declared an unusual mortality event with no clear cause. There are mysteries here that even the scientists and feds haven't solved, or if they have, they're not sharing. Do I ever doubt myself? Sure, I have moments where I think it would be simpler to write it all off as imagination. But then I remember that massive footprint I cast, or the scorched clearing we stumbled upon in the Queets Valley, or how my hands were still trembling after that encounter. Those tangible things snap me back to reality. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Sometimes I drive back out near the park, just because I miss it. There's a spot by Forks with a roadside sign that jokingly reads, "Twilight stops here." I always chuckle, because for me that sign has another meaning. It's where the normal world ends and the Olympic wilderness begins, the place where the unknown still lurks. I often roll my window down there. The air smells of damp moss and cedar, and it feels like the woods are breathing. Beyond that sign, in those misty forests, I'm convinced there are secrets we're only beginning to guess at. So that's my story. Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever get a solid explanation, or if this will remain an open secret of the Olympics. Maybe it's better that some mysteries stay unsolved. It gives this wild place a bit of magic, if you ask me. I realize it's a lot to take in, and I don't blame anyone for raising an eyebrow, but I stand by what I lived through. These days, when I hike in Olympic, I treat the place with even more respect. I stick to the trails at dusk. I pay attention when the forest goes too quiet, and I always keep an open mind, because out there in the fog and ferns, you never really know what might be watching from the shadows. In an age where everything seems mapped and explained, it's kind of comforting that the Olympic wilderness still holds on to some of its secrets.